Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Jormungander. Yorm is Yorm. He's a high damaging soul lane and occasionally support guardian, with a flurry of unique mechanics specific to him. Before that though, let's dive into builds. And since his soul lane and support playstyles are so similar, I'll consider this guide good for both roles. Here's some builds for both. Yorm, like our friends Shiva and Chalk, is a god who likes to be tanky, but really makes great use of any and all power that can be splashed into his build. Relics wise, Yorm is very flexible, but he likes relics that you don't see as often. Since he's an immobile giant, Thorns is actually a good defensive option for him, and focusing on sustained damage means Sunder is also a good option too for offense. In soul lane though, teleport is seen frequently as Yorm is, well, he's Yorm, so he's very slow and very bad from behind. Let's get into one of the main reasons why. So if you haven't played Yorm and seen how tall he is, there you go. Yeah, this perspective of Yorm is unique to say the least, but it's thanks to Yorm's stature that he gets his passive. Yorm cannot be displaced whatsoever, so pulls, knockups, and knockbacks have no effect on Yorm. Instead, Yorm gets dazed for 2 seconds when hit by a displacement CC, which slows Yorm for a flat 15% and makes him take 5% increased damage for the duration. And abilities like Sylvanas Pull or Herc Push will still stun Yorm, but they won't displace him, and they'll still put this daze effect on him as well as the stun. So this is the definition of a double-edged sword. And on that note, here's a bunch of gods that Yorm is really good into since he cannot be displaced. Keep this in mind when drafting Yorm in ranked, and just so you know, never draft Yorm early. Why? Well, he can get locked down super hard, especially against these gods here. These are gods with more consistent displacement abilities that can still hit Yorm with those abilities and daze him, and it opens up Yorm to getting dog piles since it's usually not their only form of CC in their kit. It's hard to put into words, and it is something you'll need to feel for yourself, so take these lists as a baseline and feel the matchups out for yourself over time. Something else that'll take some getting used to is Yorm's basic attacks. Yorm basic attacks and a coned AoE in front of him. These basic attacks slowing down after prolonged usage since Yorm is kinda just breathing on them. The current status of Yorm's basic attacks are here on his passive bar, and obviously the lower the bar gets, the slower the basic attacks start coming out. And naturally, he regains the bar by stopping basic attacking, and essentially taking a deep breath. If Yorm gains attack speed, whether it be by an aura item, a regular item, or just the attack speed buff, his basic attacks will regenerate faster, but they won't fire faster. And attack speed slows will never affect Yorm's attack speed nor his regeneration. And thank God for this, his basic attacks don't proc item effects. So things like Toxic Blade, Demonic Ring, Telkine's Ring, none of them will work on Yorm. That said, items that directly grant basic attack damage like Gilded Arrow will still grant half the basic attack damage. This, like Shiva's passive, is another small tidbit I couldn't find information for anyways. But yeah, things that grant flat basic attack damage will only grant half of the value to Yorm's basic attack damage. It's a good thing though, since even with this technicality, Gilded Arrow is still a sleeper starter item for Yorm, and it really helps his early pressure. It's not something I'd recommend to a player new to Yorm, as his basic attacks do plenty of work on their own without Gilded Arrow, but it's something you keep in the back pocket to try out. Needless to say, you don't use these basic attacks like you would basic attacks. For one, they actually do hit deployables which require basic attacks to destroy. So Odin Cage, Persephone ult, they all get shredded instantly by Yorm. But you do use them like normal basic attacks on the wave for pressure, but Yorm has the advantage of being able to pile damage onto minions as well as any god in or near the wave. This is why Yorm is never ever picked into an enemy ranged solo laner, as his decent damage AoE basic attacks are one of the most important parts of his laning phase, and he can never properly apply damage against an opponent with too much range on him. That said, he's never completely out of it thanks to one of the longest range normal abilities in SMITE, his first ability. Yorm spits a small AoE onto the ground which will persist for 20 seconds and will damage any enemies upon its landing. This puddle will lightly damage and slow any enemies hit, so if you hit a god dead on with this, they'll immediately be hit with a slow as well. It's a simple ability but a useful one. You want to spit on waves during laning phase for the most part, but if you ever set up a freeze on a wave or have an ADC with great clear on their own, it's a great tool just to keep chipping away at the opponent. Also, once the game gets later, don't forget to pop this over walls and in certain choke points around objectives to keep tabs on enemies for free. If they walk over your puddle, you'll get the damage over time on them and they'll be semi-revealed to you. That about does it with this ability on its own, but it's how it interacts with the second ability where the ability really comes into its own. Yorm sucks up power from any and all puddles around him, then lets out a shockwave that deals damage to and trembles any enemies hit, the AoE and damage of the shockwave being increased by how many puddles Yorm drew power from, up to 3 times total for a nasty amount of damage. And that's it really. This ability is Yorm's main source of damage, so you want to use it for wave clear, trades, you name it. Just remember to always try and play around those puddles if you can. And it ties back to me earlier mentioning that you want to fire your 1 whenever you can for both. Now, the channeling does take a while for this ability, and with a 14-second cooldown, you'll need to choose whether or not you go for a trade or wave clear. But depending on the matchup, Jorm can easily just ignore his lane opponent and just 1-2 the wave regardless of what they do. Going back to that chart I mentioned earlier, which went in Jorm's favor. Even so, if they can stop Jorm's second ability, it doesn't matter much, since even if the casting of Jorm's second ability is stopped, the cooldown and mana costs are not taken away, and Jorm can use it right away after being interrupted. And the good stuff doesn't stop there, since if Jorm empowered this ability by absorbing a nearby puddle, his basic attacks will not reduce his charge rate on his meter for 2 seconds, so you can go full chat with your basic attacks right after a massive burst of damage. An awesome ability, when both empowered by absorbing a puddle and, actually being in range to hit it. So how does Jorm get in range for a second ability? With his third ability, of course. Jorm dives into the ground and stealths himself, gaining movement speed and pulsing the area around him. These pulses see all enemies, even through walls and while stealthed. The drawback of this being, if they're in range to be pulsed, they can hear the pulses as well, so they'll hear you coming. You're still stealth though, so try to keep things crafty, because when this ability ends, or when Jorm cancels this ability, Jorm explodes up out of the ground and damages as well as knocks up any enemies in the AoE. So a great ability, but not so fast. If Jorm takes any damage while stealth, he'll be revealed, but will still be able to move around and perform the knockup. But if you CC, the ability is cancelled entirely. So a very strong ability, but with its fair share of risks. This is Jorm's only form of movement as well as hard CC in his base kit, so you'll need to use this at one point or another during a fight. But how you use it is important too. Not to spoil anything, but your ultimate is a high CC, high damaging, high movement ability, kind of like a way better version of this ability. So your usage of this ability is more or less determined by the status of your ultimate. When your ultimate is up, it pretty much always takes this ability's place, and you use this to supplement yourself once your ultimate has completed. Without your ultimate though, you really do want to live up to your snake heritage and sneak around and take things slow. Without your ultimate, you need to hit this ability or just completely rely on your teammate's CC to get in with your second ability. That said, it's not at all bad, since if Jorm arises in a puddle, he will spawn 2 extra puddles in front of where he arose. And surprise surprise, that just happens to be all the puddles you need for a max empowered 2. So it's an excellent supplemental ability, and it's great in mid-game skirmishes since you typically want to start with this ability and then go into your ultimate. Late game, however, Jorm is all about his ultimate, so let's get to it. Jorm becomes CC immune and winds up. He can then leap a massive distance up to 3 times, each time he lands, creating a puddle as well as damaging and knock up any enemies hit, slowing and damaging for a very small amount any enemies between Jorm and his destination as he lands, kind of doing a belly flop on them. Jorm also can't cancel this ability whatsoever. The only way for this ability to end is for Jorm to jump 3 times. Or die, which is unlikely since Jorm is completely CC immune and immune to all new instances of damage while both between and during leaps. This ability is great, a get out of jail free card, a teamfight annihilator all in one, with the huge range of the leaps, and 3 leaps at your disposal giving you endless options of how you want to play it out. But where you have to be careful is with the speed of this ability. It is, quite simply, the slowest thing in all of human history, so leading these shots into your intended target, which should always be a squishy by the way, is going to be tough. Get it going though, and they're all yours. One knock up into another is easily achievable and grants insane damage, and of course sets you up for a 1-2 combo right after, then a chase down with your 3 afterwards. As I'm sure you could guess though, you don't want to start fights with this ability alone. You typically want to let your teammates do the heavy lifting, if you can in terms of CC. It's one of the main reasons he's seen as more of a soul laner, since you need hefty CC elsewhere on your team to make sure you're effective. So essentially in fights, Jorm stands around spitting his 1 whenever he can, and waits for either his team or the enemy team to engage, then follows them in with his ultimate. And of course if it's a heavy winning trade for your team, you just go in with your 3 instead and then chase with the ultimate. Speaking of when the enemy team engages though, while this is a great escape tool, you're going to want to give yourself at least 2 leaps to escape with if that's your intention. Sticking around to deal damage is just going to immediately backfire on you, as the ultimate really is just that slow and you'll be easily caught up to. It's going to take a lot of practice to get right, so don't feel bad if your first few ultimates seem to get nothing done or just plain get you killed. A good rule of thumb is do what you're going to do, as in going in or escaping, but do it fast. Sitting around waiting for a good time to pounce is only going to give your opponents more time to prepare both mentally and physically, well physically in game anyways, for your ultimate. To show you what I mean, here's some combos of Jorm. For ability leveling, you want your 1 at level 1, your 2 at level 2, and your 3 at level 3. From there you max your 2, your 1, then your 3, and level your ult whenever you can. Jormungander is hard to put into words. He's an immobile tank like no other, and he's hard to pick up and do well with right away. His abilities are familiar, yet he plays differently from every other god in the game. I've barely played Jorm though, and yet my win rate on him is extremely high. So what he sets out to do, he does extremely well. That said, he does struggle against certain gods a lot more than other characters. And if you get behind on Jorm, it's downright awful, and you feel a lot more helpless than you would on most warriors or other guardians. Still, his lane control is absolutely excellent, and when he's able to use his full ultimate in teamfights, the chaos he can create is extremely potent. So if Jorm seems cool to you, stick with him, as learning the ins and outs of the character will reward you heavily. That's all I have on Jorm for now. Thanks for watching.